Well, why don't we start our 2 o'clock discussion? What is this collection of happy, joyful people doing here? And Mr. Shapiro, I know you have comments to make on a previous item, but at the risk of all of them yelling, if I let you do it now.
No, it's this item.
Oh, it's this item.
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. We had you down as item number 7, and I wondered what you were going to say on that different item. Okay. This is a report related to a environmental project in Yolo County, and I guess, Mr. Buck, you had queried me on the subject previously and are involved in this, and perhaps you might, subject to Mr. Ray's approval, start off. I think that's the way to start. What do you want to do, Dan?
I think the point here has been that we have been talking. Last hearing we heard the report from the Estuary Institute about their studies on the historical ecology of the Delta, kind of setting the big picture of what the Delta once was like. And we know, of course, that we have a charge to restore the Delta ecosystem, that a near-term priority is to make progress towards the current biological opinions requirement to restore 8,000 acres of tidal marsh. Some of you have visited Sassoon Marsh and other places where marsh restoration is underway. And of course, one of the other places that's long been targeted for habitat restoration has been the Yolo bypass, which is now the engineered remnant of the old Yolo Basin flood control basin that we heard about or flood basin that we heard about in the historical ecology report. The state and federal contractors water agency has been working in conjunction with some of its members and others to plan a large habitat restoration project in the southern end of the Yolo bypass on the Yolo Ranch. It's an example of the kinds of projects that we can expect going forward. And so it seemed like it would be a great idea to ask them to come and explain the project they have proposed, but also to hear from other people who have got an interest in that area. And so we've invited 3 other participants on the panel. Phil Pogledich, who's a counsel with the Yolo County, which of course has got the land use authority there. So one way to think about this, remember when we heard the Economic Sustainability Plan, we had quite a bit of discussion about the Delta Protection Commission's suggestion that local government land use plans should be that habitat restoration actions and water management actions should be required to be consistent with local government land use plans, and that they should fully mitigate their impacts on the local economy. And that's been one of Yolo County's points of view. And so I think we can have a chance to hear a little bit about the county's concerns on those issues. Next in line is Ron Unger from the Department of Water Resources. Of course, the Yolo bypass is an integral flood control feature in the Central Valley. And so one of the questions that we can think about is how does this habitat restoration project fit together with the implementation of Central Valley Flood Plan and long-term planning for flood control in that area. And then finally, we also talked about the importance of understanding the impacts of these projects on adjacent land uses. And so we've got Scott Shapiro who's here from the adjoining Reclamation District, Reclamation District 2068, to talk about, share with us their points of view about the project.
Okay.
And so we didn't expect you to take any action or
can we be curious?
But we certainly hoped it would be a chance for conversation and information and some early thoughts from you, perhaps, as these guys begin to develop their ideas for you. So with that, I'll turn it over to Byron.
Mr. Buck.
Thanks, Dan.
You have to press the red
all
button.
the way down. Locked. I'm now locked.
You may have to first press the blue button to make sure it's up, and the red button to make sure it's down.
Sounds like I'm live.
Does that work?
Sounds like I am, yeah.
All right.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm Byron Buck. I'm the Executive Director of the State and Federal Contractors Water Agency, and, well, it's been a while since I've been here.
Been a while, that's
I do
true.
truly miss our discussions of the finer points of
You
water
didn't have a
water
goatee
management.
the last time you were
I think
here.
I did.
Oh,
okay, well, that first part was a lie, but I am happy to be here today to talk about the something that I think we're all quite interested in, as getting on with the business of ecosystem restoration in the Delta under the co-equal goals. We've been working on 3 projects in the Delta, and the one I want to talk about today is the furthest along in the planning and implementation process, known as the Lower Yolo Ranch Restoration Project. So following your, where am I pointing this at? Oh, wait a minute, that's the wrong one. Okay, there we go. Well, I'm now a couple slides ahead. Okay, thanks. I have a short presentation to go through, just allow plenty of time for the panel to give you kind of an overview of the project. We are the sponsor of it. We're a collection, a joint powers authority of this export contractor, state and federal, serving about 2/3 of the state and about 3 million acres of farmland. So 25 million people overall receive water through our member agencies. And we're the ones that essentially will be paying for the requirements and the biological opinions for restoration of tidal habitat and seasonal salmon habitat. And this project is oriented towards getting a project on the ground that starts to chip away at those acreage requirements in the BO.
Mr. Buck, you mentioned 2 words I want you to talk about either now or later in your presentation,
Okay.
the biological opinions. So much of what we hear here is either arguments about what's in BDCP or what's not in BDCP, that I thought it was quite interesting that the primary emphasis seems on satisfying the existing biological opinions. And you decide when you want to talk about it, but that seems to me it's worth mentioning.
Yeah, I think it's probably appropriate to talk now. I mean, the current biological opinions are the current operating requirements for the projects as they exist today. Those are kind of always in play, always being able to be revised. There's a remand process looking at them, but one of the aspects of them that appears to have very little argument is we need restoration within the Delta to restore a lot of the ecological function that used to be there that supported the native fisheries. And so there are current requirements in the BOs. This all rolls up into BDCP. Credit we would get under the biological opinions also would credit against a BDCP. So biologically, they're one and the same. Technically, this is a requirement today. It doesn't, BDCP goes away, we'll still be doing this project.
Yeah, I thought that was notable. In your first footnote on the first page of the memo, first document you sent to us explained that, but it's unique because I haven't run into yet other parties talking about the biops and a particular proposal in quite this way.
Okay, good. So at any rate, that is the purpose. It's to support the habitat that endangered and threatened species, particularly Delta smelt and Chinook salmon, need to thrive. The ownership of the land is owned by one of our member agencies, Westlands Water District. Scheduled roughly, we have a draft environmental impact report scheduled to come out in about a week. We'll have 45-plus day review period into February on that. We're looking to construct by next summer. Financing, we will be doing the upfront financing under our current plan, and we will have what's called a credit purchase agreement with Department of Water Resources and hopefully a funding agreement with the Bureau of Reclamation, who are ultimately the agencies responsible for the biological opinion requirements. All of that does is it's a mechanism to put it on our water rates. So we pay for it. It's just the mechanism runs through the Bureau and through DWR. All kind of complicated, but kind of necessary in the way we have to finance things. So again, we're looking to try to build this May at the earliest, probably July on where we're going. Okay, now it doesn't want to go. Where am I? Should we be pointing this way?
It's our new rule,
Okay.
only one slide.
Over the
per
shoulder, yeah, one slide. Well, I'm done then. Just a little location map where we are. The site is this red area here.
It's within the YOLO.
It's within the yellow bypass. It's at the lower end of it, pretty much.
Okay.
Within Yolo County, Solano County is the western border, the west levee of the bypass, but it's entirely within Yolo County at this point. This is what we call our draft concept design. It's what's the primary alternative in the EIR. We have some lesser alternatives that are involved, and the design is actually quite a bit in play still at the moment. We're a bit at the 11th hour in that process. We're moving to final design, but we've had some recent discussions with some of your ecosystem science people and others that there may be a less intensive version of this in terms of the amount of excavation which we would do, which would save us money and save us some problems on what to do with that excavated spoil that produce a different ecological value, but essentially within the same parameters as required in the biological opinion. So we're assembling a group of experts to try to get us to kind of that final mile and see what biologically we want to do within the parameters we've laid out in the design that's portrayed in the environmental review process. But in essence, it involves taking down these low restricted height levees in the system and allowing tidal function to return. This site is one of the really ideal sites within the delta where the land elevation is essentially within the tidal range. And so we have to do very little to it to restore the function that used to exist there. It was one of the last areas of the delta that was taken out of natural wetland, and so it's one of the more easily restorable areas. It's pretty low value agricultural land now. It's just simply irrigated pasture. And so it's a kind of an ideal site from an ecological function and an ideal site in terms of minimally affecting agricultural economics in the region. The ranch is about 3,800 acres. We're going to restore about 1,500 within it. So
is the entire ranch owned?
Entire ranch is owned by Westlands.
Westlands, okay.
Yeah,
all 3,800.
Yeah, all 3,800. Okay. There is another owner up here that, and his intention is
we
to
can't
do similar things.
On the television set in front of us, we can't see the red dot. So when you say up here, where is up there?
On the north end of the site where the property line comes south, that is separate ownership, but we are in cooperation with them. They have some similar designs long-term to do restoration. There is the site over here, which is called Flyway Farms. We do not own that yet, or I wouldn't say yet. We don't own it. We've been in discussion.
Yeah,
we haven't
try not to start.
We haven't come
here.
to terms, but that is in the EIR as a phase 2. If we were able to come to terms on that property, this is kind of artist's illustration. Aerial north looking south into the bypass. So the site is essentially in this area.
Ship channel on the left.
Ship channel on the left, exactly, and that would be east. That's west, south. So we're looking south here, kind of inverted from a normal map view. Right. But this is a rendering of what it would look like in a high tide cycle or the remnant of a draining flood cycle in the bypass. There's a lot of restored wetlands and restoring wetlands in and around this area, so it's not an isolated, postage stamp. It's part of an integrated network and what we want to do in the bypass.
You included a visual in your first presentation, Northwest Delta setting, that I think, if you have it on the slides, it's worth
I don't have it on the slides. It's in your memo, though.
Yeah, and I must confess, I remembered a little bit about the South Yolo project, but I had not, until I'd looked at this map, remembered the close proximity to Liberty Island and some of the other issues that are around it that are arguably of tangible benefit. And this map reminded me of it, and that was one of the points that I thought was quite interesting in the presentation. Yeah, members, you do have that map in your agenda packet.
Yeah, in that packet you'll notice Liberty Island, Little Holland Tract, which is a restored project already in,
right.
In ecological succession, and Prospect Island owned by DWR, that's another project. So within this network you've got a couple of thousand acres of restored wetland and right. potential in various states of kind of the permit and design process. This is just kind of a table of what gets created in the two phases. It's tidal marsh, it's tidal marsh enhancement, seasonal marsh enhancement, and some riparian. All rolls up to about 1,500 acres of restored wetland, long way from our 8,000 acre wetland goal, but it's a chunk, and there's, as we say, we've got a couple other projects, DWR has a number of projects. All of these agencies are coordinating together to try to, produce this fairly daunting requirement in the short-term time we have left in the current BOs. These are not simple projects. We've got 11 agencies we need permits from and 17 permits when you add it up. There's just nothing simple in the Delta, nothing simple in this part of the world. And then I just like to wrap up with finally that economic issues are an issue within kind of the Delta and the Delta Plan. As you know, there's been a lot of discussion of adverse economic impacts with wetland restoration. And we've hired an economics firm to take a look at this project in particular with the range of kind of our intensive high excavation alternative to the lower ones and run through what does it do to the local economy over 50 years. And this, you see just from the summary of this, it's a $27 to $35 million net plus to the local economy over time. Yes, you do lose some agricultural production. Again, this is pretty low value grazing land, just irrigated grazing land. Doesn't take out all of that on the ranch, only about a third of it. But we do pick up an awful lot of investment on the front end with the construction of the project, and then there's quite a bit of long-term site maintenance and management and monitoring programs. And one of the things we've talked about with the county is we're going to need people that don't really exist right now at a kind of, AA degree level to be out on the ground doing surveys and finding out what's going on with the site. So we think we can add that and work with the counties and local community colleges to create a program that creates locally based jobs that would be good, well-paying jobs, $20, $30, $35 an hour at least, to be out there on the site doing this work. Because we're 10 years into monitoring to know what's going to happen with these sites, and that will pretty much replace the kind of ongoing labor that's there now, which is a pretty low-intensive nature given it's just a pasture grazing operation. So when you actually look at these projects specifically, there's a pretty big infusion of money that comes into the local county from a project like this. Won't be the same magnitude in every place. Different projects will be somewhat different, but this one, given the site, has a very strong net plus.
Have you done any calculations on any flood protection implications from this?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
What do you find?
It's a defining issue. I mean, the bypass's primary function is flood protection, and so that's been a design parameter.
This area is open land now, and it gets flooded, right?
Right. And so anything we do in physical modifications, if you go back to the plan, we are excavating in these blue lines, and in this particular option, we're doing a lot of excavation outside that shapes the land so that you've got this dendritic pattern. It's pulling out about 1.5 million cubic yards of spoil, expensive, heavy. Got to put that someplace. In this version, we place it on the west levee, working in cooperation with RD 2068. They've got an erosion problem on this levee, so it's a local use, and we put the remainder behind this area of the ranch buildings,
we can't see where you're pointing.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Tell
again.
us west side or east side.
West side, the kind of. If you see, do you see? It's in color for you, isn't it?
We can see the color.
You can see the color. Okay, so west side, you see that north-south brown band. That would placement of the spoil on the west levee of the bypass that helped RD 2068's erosion problem. Added to it as a sacrificial berm, not a structural element, mind you.
Sacrificial berm.
Yeah. It would be a road. Yeah, it is mine anyway. It would be erodible. It's not a structural. It's not like a rip-rap slope. It's a dirt, but engineered, compacted. But it would still erode in high flood incidents. It would last for 30+ years, but it would protect the structural elements of the levee. And the remainder of the spoil we could put in that crosshatched area just to the north of that, which is a restricted height levee within the bypass. We've run this alternative through preliminarily with both the Flood Board and the Corps of Engineers. It's a net improvement to the flood situation for the most part, and some minor localized changes, but overall we're taking material out and creating more flood capacity. So that works.
Assume the primary benefited parties are Sacramento, West Sacramento?
Well, anybody downstream and really upstream. It's almost noise level impact, so you can barely see it in the models. Mm-hmm. So we've basically concluded there is no significant flood change. But to your point, that's a big deal of doing anything in the bypass. You got to maintain the flood capacity. You can't have more than a marginal effect. And so we've done a lot of modeling to make sure that's the case.
Okay, Mr. Ray.
Well, I thought one thing would be helpful would be to get an understanding, because one of the challenges is thinking through how often we're going to have to replicate this kind of activity to get to the large amount of habitat restoration that's proposed. How long have you all been working on this? And how much have you spent, maybe if you could tell us from the time the property was first...
Mr. Buck was in elementary school.
When it was, where you hope to begin construction.
Well, I definitely didn't have the goatee when we started. And it was black if I'd had one. We've been at this a better part of 5 years. I think the land was purchased in 2008. My agency's only existed for 3 years, and so it was started with work between Westlands and Metropolitan Water District, and we took it over as kind of a joint activity that we're jointly funding. So we've been at it 5 years, probably in a real heavy level the last 3. We've got close to $4 million invested in planning and engineering, land acquisitions beyond that. But that much in planning and engineering and construction, we're looking at it's a $20 million or $20,000 an acre project when you get down to it. These are not cheap. Land values like $3. So the big money goes into the design and engineering and then the actual physical changes. And that becomes a real big parameter in what you design, how you're trying to meet the ecological goals, yet keep your costs down. And anytime you're doing land movement, that's where the money comes in. And so we are in discussions with a number of Delta Science ecologists for shorthand to see if there's a different version that they kind of like, a little more of a mosaic, a little less tidal excavation. That helps us because there are a lot of issues just even internally as well as externally with moving that amount of spoil in the bypass. And there's air quality issues when you have big excavators out there for a long period of time, so we've had to mitigate and we'll have to shut down if we have a bad air quality day, that sort of thing. And there's a big cost aspect to that. So we may well end up with a version that is less aggressive, the same sort of footprint, a little more higher tidal upland. Same acreage, basically, but a different kind of mosaic ecologically. And as long as it fits within the regulatory parameters we're trying to meet in the BO, that's all good, and the biologists are happy. We could be happy because it becomes a more economical project and one we'd put forward as a first effort. We've got a couple others in the pipeline, and there's half a dozen others we're working on with DWR, but this is the one that's perhaps the furthest along at a large scale.
Randy?
Along the lines of financial implications, and I know we're going to get to this, but I want to make sure my numbers in my head are correct. If we're talking about a base land value of $3,000 an acre,
Round numbers, yeah.
The property taxes on that are about $300 a year.
It's a Williamson Act contract, and I've looked at the property tax numbers. I couldn't tell you what per acre they are, but one of the things we pledge is we're going to backfill the property tax with the long-term maintenance agreement. So there's no county tax loss.
Long-term or eternal?
50 years at least.
Oh, okay.
The other thought I had, and it doesn't have anything to do with anything other than the cost that you described, given the value of the land plus the incremental investment, is about what a vineyard operator would spend on developing a vineyard in the periphery of the Delta. So
yeah, that's right.
It's not, just to put it in perspective in relative terms.
And we're just growing fish here.
Okay.